ActiveResource is a module in the Rails ecosystem. Its purpose is to give you a familiar ActiveRecord-like interface for accessing RESTful APIs. If ActiveRecord is an object relational mapper, also known as an ORM, for connecting to a database and manipulating its tables, then ActiveResource does the equivalent for reaching REST API endpoints over an HTTP connection. ActiveResource implements many methods with the same name and conceptual function as an ActiveRecord. You've got basic CRUD operations like find, create, update, and delete. But while at first glance this seems like a copy of ActiveRecord, it's built from the ground up and has quirks that make it behave differently when you start working with it on a detailed level. A popular Ruby library built on top of ActiveResource is the Shopify API gem. This gem allows you to use Ruby for configuring all aspects of a Shopify storefront using the RESTful API. Every API endpoint is mapped to an ActiveResource object. Calling one of the CRUD methods on such an object will run the appropriate HTTP request that performs the respective data operation on the Shopify store. Now let's take a look at a simple example. I'm going to show you how ActiveResource objects behave similarly to ActiveRecord models, and then show you how they're fundamentally different. So I set up an example product in my Shopify store which we can query using the Shopify API. Let's try to find this product using the Shopify API product object, which is an ActiveResource model. As you can see, we can view and manipulate the properties of this product very similarly to how we work with data objects in Rails ActiveRecord. But unlike an ActiveRecord, the data store is a remote service, so all of the information and commands are transmitted through HTTP requests instead of database queries. So now I want to point out how ActiveResource can behave differently from ActiveRecord, which is important because the two kinds of objects are not interchangeable if you plan to write code that duck types them. By duck typing, I mean writing code that behaves agnostically as to the type of object that it's working on, as long as the method calls on that object behave a certain way. Duck typing, more formally known as Liskov substitution, is a pillar of a software engineering concept known as solid design. If you want to learn more about solid design, I recommend the book Practical Object-Oriented Design by Sandy Metz. Let's take a look at an ActiveRecord model I created to mirror the content in my Shopify store. This model has many of the same fields representing the format of the data returned in the API, so you would think that we can write code that accepts either the ActiveResource model or the ActiveRecord model mirror and can do the same kind of processing on the information. But here's an example of different behavior that occurs when you're instantiating a new object. The ActiveRecord model, upon creation, creates accessor methods for each database field and initializes the value to nil. It's able to do this because it has a schema to reference. So on a new ActiveRecord object, if we query the price field, it will return a value of nil. Now let's try to do the same thing on the ActiveResource version of the data model. When we try to access the price field, it raises a no method error. This is because the ActiveResource does not by default know what data fields are available until you run some sort of query against the API endpoint. If the no method error causes a problem in our code, we can get around it by using the Ruby try method, which will return nil when attempting to call a method that doesn't exist. So in this video, my goal was to tell you about the Ruby library ActiveResource, which can be helpful for building a data mapping to a RESTful API service. However, although it has some similarities to ActiveRecord, you will encounter unique quirks about it which can complicate your code. If you like this video, please give it a like on YouTube and subscribe to my channel for more topics like this.